You ever watch someone walk into an ambush they set for themselves? That's what happened here.
Picture this. A woman sits across from three HR representatives, a folder in her lap, her hands steady, her voice calm. Across the table, one of those representatives is fuming, barely hiding it, because she had walked into that room expecting to recommend a termination. She had expected to end this woman's job. What she did not expect was 16 signed witness statements, a highlighted clause from a contract she clearly never thought anyone would read, and a medical history that reframed every single insult her friend had spent 3 months cheerfully delivering in front of the entire office. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, it was not our narrator packing up her desk.
She walked into that room prepared. Jill had no idea what was coming.
But to understand how we got to that moment, we have to go back a few years because this story does not begin with a petty coworker and a lunchroom comment. It begins with grief and fear and a decision that no 24-year-old should ever have to make. Our narrator lost her mother to breast cancer when she was just 24 years old. This was not the first time the disease had touched her family. Both of her grandmothers had also died from it. With that kind of history sitting heavy in her chest, she did what any terrified young woman with access to a doctor would do. She got tested. The results came back, and the news was not good. Potentially cancerous cells already present in her breast tissue, already there and waiting. Her doctor gave her a choice that was not really much of a choice at all. She could wait and watch and hope, or she could act. She chose to act. She had a double mastectomy. What her medical team did not fully prepare her for was the scarring. She had been warned, yes, but warnings have a way of falling short of reality. The scars she was left with were an inch long and half an inch wide, sitting on her chest, impossible to ignore, impossible to dress around, impossible to unsee every morning when she looked in the mirror. What followed was not just physical recovery, it was a quiet collapse of her sense of self. She stopped leaving her flat. She felt sick at the sight of her own reflection. The mental weight of it became unbearable, and she eventually found herself sitting in a therapist's office, trying to put language to something that felt beyond words.
She did not just survive cancer. She had to rebuild herself from the ground up, and she did it.
The therapist was good at her job. They worked through cognitive behavioral therapy together, and then the therapist made a practical suggestion, one that turned out to change everything. She referred our narrator to a plastic surgeon. The surgeon looked at the scars and said they could be hidden. Before the mastectomy, our narrator had been naturally a large cup size, and the surgeon suggested implants that would conceal the scarring while restoring something close to how she had looked before. She went ahead with it. The scars were covered. She could look at herself again. Her mental health improved. She returned to her life. She went back to work. And for a good stretch of time, things were genuinely fine. She had come through something devastating and rebuilt herself piece by piece. And she deserved every bit of the stability she had clawed back.
Then came Jill. A few months before the day everything came to a head, our narrator was having lunch with a friend, a woman who had known her before the surgery, and they were chatting about an upcoming holiday. The friend made a light joke about implants and airplane pressure, the kind of joke that only works between people who know each other well and trust each other completely. Our narrator laughed. It was a private moment between friends. Unfortunately, a coworker named Jill was close enough to overhear the punchline without any of the context that gave it meaning. Jill did not ask questions. Jill did not check her assumptions. Jill simply decided she now had interesting information and began sharing it with the rest of the office, announcing to anyone who would listen that their coworker had gotten a cosmetic boob job. What followed was 3 months of low-grade cruelty. Jill called her fake in 2 ways. She called her more plastic than Barbie. She made these comments to other coworkers, always just loud enough for our narrator to hear, always dressed up as jokes, so there would be plausible deniability if anyone pushed back. Our narrator asked her to stop. Not once. 4 times, spread across 3 months. She told Jill clearly and calmly that the comments were making her uncomfortable and she wanted them to end. Jill kept going. There is a specific kind of contempt in someone who is told their behavior is causing harm and simply chooses to continue, and Jill had it in abundance. The lunchroom was where it finally broke open. A group of coworkers, including our narrator Jill and a few others, were sitting together when a man named Bob started talking about his daughter's fiancé, someone he clearly disapproved of. Our narrator gently suggested Bob was being a little shallow. Jill saw her opening. She looked at our narrator, gestured at her chest, and said that she would know all about being shallow. 3 months of quiet endurance ended in that moment. Our narrator put down her food, looked around the table, and said what she had never said at work before.
This is the moment. This is where she stops being polite and starts being precise.
She told them everything. She told them about the cancer cells found in her breast tissue in her mid-20s. She told them about her mother and her grandmothers and the fear that had driven her to surgery. She told them about the scars, about the months she spent unable to look at herself, about the therapist and the surgeon, and the slow, painful process of recovering, not just physically, but mentally. She told them she had gotten implants so she could look at herself in the mirror without crying. And then she said, quietly and clearly, that maybe next time Jill wanted to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, she should find out why they had it first. Then she picked up her food and walked out. The fallout was immediate and divided. Someone followed her out to tell her she was being oversensitive, that Jill had just been joking, that it was cruel to blindside someone like that. Our narrator replied that Jill had been unkind long before she had. The office split roughly in half, some supporting her, some supporting Jill, and by the end of the day, an email had arrived from HR requesting a meeting the following morning, citing a hostile work environment. Our narrator read that email and felt her stomach drop, but she did not panic. She thought. She noticed the name on the email, a woman named Debbie, and she knew that name. Debbie was Jill's friend. If Debbie was overseeing the complaint, the outcome was almost certainly already decided. So our narrator did not go home and worry. She went home and prepared. She pulled out her original employment contract and read through the complaint section, and there it was, a clause she had signed years ago and probably never expected to need. She was contractually entitled to request an impartial overseer if she believed her assigned reviewer had a conflict of interest. She photocopied the page. She highlighted the clause. Then she got on social media and reached out to every coworker who had offered her support that day, asking a simple question. Did you witness Jill making comments about me, and are you willing to put that in writing?
I cannot overstate how smart this move was. She turned their ambush into her ammunition.
Not everyone said yes. Jill had spent years cultivating friendships with people in HR and management, and she was the kind of person who made others nervous about crossing her. But 16 people said yes. 16 coworkers sat down that evening and wrote signed statements detailing specific insults, approximate dates and times, and direct quotes of things Jill had said to them. Some of them went further than our narrator had even expected, because as it turned out, Jill's cruelty was not limited to one target. There were comments about a coworker's weight. There was something anti-Semitic said about another coworker's nose. Jill had apparently been making the office a miserable place for a significant number of people, and those people had been waiting for a reason to say so. The next morning, our narrator arrived early. She collected the printed and signed letters from her colleagues one by one. She organized them alongside her highlighted contract page and her own written timeline of dates and times. Then she walked into HR. Debbie was standing at her desk, ready to lead her into a side room, exuding the quiet confidence of someone who thinks the meeting is a formality. Our narrator turned away from her and addressed the other HR representative in the room, asking if her meeting was with them instead. Debbie said no, the meeting was with her. Our narrator said politely and without raising her voice that she was not comfortable with that arrangement, and produced the highlighted contract page. Debbie read it and insisted she could be impartial. Our narrator said she did not doubt Debbie's intentions, but she had good reason to believe the person who had filed the complaint was Debbie's close friend, and the contract gave her the right to ask for someone else. Debbie went to get the supervisor. What followed was a 30-minute interview in which our narrator was calm, precise, and completely prepared for every question. When asked why she had not gone to HR sooner, she said she had not had a problem with Jill, only Jill had a problem with her. When asked to explain her medical history, she did so clearly and offered full permission for HR to review her file. When asked what she believed had triggered the complaint, she described the lunchroom conversation, noted there was camera footage, and handed over a list of the 6 people who had been present. When asked whether Jill had ever been told about the cancer, she said no, that her medical history was not something she owed a coworker in exchange for basic dignity. At the end of the interview, the supervisor stood up, shook her hand, and sent her back to her desk. She pulled up her resume when she sat down. She assumed the worst and decided to be ready for it. What happened next unfolded across the rest of the afternoon like a slow, deeply satisfying chain reaction. One by one, the people who had been in the lunchroom were called into HR, then the people who had written letters. Each meeting lasted about 10 minutes. By mid-afternoon, it looked like everyone who had either witnessed something or put their name on a statement had been spoken to. And then, finally, Jill was called in. She was gone for 30 minutes. She came back visibly furious, sat at her desk, and stared at our narrator while she worked. Our narrator did not look up. At around 4:30, Jill was called back into HR. She did not come back for another 30 minutes. When she did return, she came in fast, she came in loud, and she started telling anyone who would listen that she had been fired, that our narrator had gotten her fired, working herself into a rage as she packed up her belongings. Then she shoved her way onto the lift and was gone. A few minutes later, an email arrived. The case was closed.
3 months of insults, 16 letters, 1 highlighted clause. Case closed.
Here's the thing that makes this story worth sitting with. Our narrator is the first to say that the reason behind her surgery, while it recontextualized everything, should not have mattered. Nobody should be mocked at work for having cosmetic surgery, full stop, no asterisk, no condition attached. But Jill had chosen to make a person's body a weapon, repeatedly, publicly, after being asked to stop multiple times. And she had done it to someone who had already survived more than most people will ever face. She had done it to someone who had buried her mother at 24 and made a terrifying medical decision alone and spent months unable to leave her flat. And when that person finally stood up and told the truth in a room full of witnesses, Jill's response was to run to a friend in HR and try to have her punished for it. The contract clause, the 16 letters, the camera footage, all of it was just Jill's own cruelty coming back to her in a form she could not argue with. If you have ever worked somewhere with a Jill, or lived next to one, or been related to one, you know exactly how rare and how good it feels when the evidence is thorough enough that even a biased process cannot save them. Drop a comment and tell me your story, because I have a feeling I am not the only one who needed to watch someone like this finally face a consequence. And if this one hit different, stick around, because there is plenty more where this came from.